Hey, I'm Kurtis Hanni. I'm here with Travis Woods, who is my partner at BisonCFO. Today, we're going to walk through the business model canvas. This is a tool that we use with all of our clients, and we find that it is really helpful for us to understand the business inside and out and is something that not only is good for us, but we found is good for the businesses that we work for. We find they often have breakthroughs from this and is something that we could not live without. So before we jump in, I kind of want to we're going to treat this casually, kind of back and forth, just a conversation. And so you're just going to get to see the inside of how we think about this and how we approach it. But I think often people don't really know what a fractional CFO, what a CFO does, and they think they're just doing the numbers. And so if you're just doing the numbers, why are you asking me about my business model? So Travis, what is your typical response? What's kind of your feedback to that for everyone?
Yeah, I think, it's almost this kind of like jarring thing for folks that they hire us as a fractional CFO and they think we're immediately going to crank out some spreadsheet, with projections and all this. And the first thing we do is bring out a one pager to talk about their business model. It's kind of this like, what have I got myself into? And we come with the philosophy that the financials are important. They are very important, but they are a downstream effect of everything else, and it's how the business operates. And so ultimately, while people are hiring us to look at their business through the financial lens, they're hiring us to come with a strategic perspective and a perspective of coming alongside them with advice on how to operate the business. And we don't feel like we can do that well if we don't understand all the things that come before the financials and flow downstream to those financials. And so we think understanding the business model and all the pieces of that are the insight that are going to give us what we need to ultimately give the client what they hired us to do. And that's to give them advice on how to operate their business. And so we use the business model canvas to do that. It forces you to simplify things, which anytime you have to simplify, you have to really, think hard about that. And it gets it on one page for us. So it's really quick. It's really easy to have a shared language where we can review everything together and get up to speed really quick.
Yeah, and it also, one of the things that I think is really helpful about this is before it was really easy to chase rabbits in what direction we were going, but this keeps it really focused, not only for us, but for the client that we're working with. And in that, uh, not only do we learn about the business, they learn about the business and have to think through some things they've maybe not thought through before. It provides a great reflection of current state, but it also allows us to even get into a little bit of what future state could look like and what are the next things they might chase. And I think just to reiterate what you said there of people think we're going to come in and just work in spreadsheets, but what we find is most needed in most small businesses is the business owner is either on an island or it's just them and their partner. It's a small group that really understands the business deeply. So by us coming in and doing this, we're the first one that's really probably had these conversations with them. And so by doing that, we get to be that strategic thought partner, the person that they bounce stuff off of. So to do the financial stuff, we have to understand this at a key level. But then by understanding this and getting to that point, it also puts us at a point where we get to have really deep conversations, which is honestly what drives us and what gets us excited. So we're going to jump right into this and just kind of walk through this as quickly as we can. This is going to obviously be a little bit of a longer thing because we're going to go through these 9 parts of the business model canvas, and it's looking at all these different aspects of the business, and we're going to break them down one by one. And we're going to use an example of a security guard business, but really this can be a proxy for all B2B services. And I want to be clear as we walk through this, every business, the business model canvas is going to look different. So you can have two of the exact same services, businesses that have business model canvases that look drastically different. There are things that are going to be the same and look the same across, but this example should give you an idea because that's where we often find people struggle to conceptualize what this is going to look like. So the hope is that the example helps you kind of conceptualize that for yourself. So Travis, you're kind of our guru on this. You're the one that leads the walkthrough of this. So let's talk about what is the first thing that we talk about in this business model canvas.
Yeah, so we're going to start with customer segments. And really, everything else is driven off of customer segments and then the value proposition. Those have to match, because if those don't match together, everything else kind of falls apart. And so those two are where we're going to spend the most time. And we're going to start with the customer segments, because I don't care what business you're in, you have to understand who your customer is. And you want to think about it as these are just the groups of people that you sell to. And so, or that buy your product, whatever it is you're offering. And so a natural question might be, well, what would make me have two customer, multiple segments? And that's typically, they may have similar needs, but some variation that's enough that it changes the value proposition or it changes how you reach them. And so, what we like to do is really dig in with each one and say, who is it that you're selling to? And then even deeper than that, they have certain jobs they're trying to accomplish. They have certain pains they're trying to avoid, and they have certain gains they're trying to acquire. And so if you can understand those on a deep level, you can then build a value proposition to match that, and then understand how you reach those people, service them, all of that. But you have to understand who that customer is and all those pieces I talked about and which one you're going to try to address.
Yeah, and just to be, this whole thing works together and in a concert, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so first we have to, like, and this often seems very simple. It's like, who do you serve at a base level? So for a physical security guard business, you could serve one of these segments, you could serve all of these segments. What we often find is you had one kind of main type of customer or group of customers that you started working with. And as the business expands, you start working with other customers as well. So, I've talked to businesses that they only work with commercial properties, right? They have a
Mm-hmm.
very specific model to where they go into this facility, they're the lead security of that security or at that facility, and that they are big in that commercial property area. Have other people that do roving security at residential communities, and they're really big within that region. And so they have a specific program that they follow, and they go really deep into that niche within that. You have other security that's event-led security, or maybe your government contracts, really heavy. Healthcare is there. You can also think like other specialties type stuff like museums or other industry-specific focuses, because again, there may be different needs within those industries. And so by identifying these different segments, we're in some ways delineating where those different needs come for those types of customers. And so we don't want to get too dogmatic here, right? We don't want to have maybe you know, maybe we've got one residential client, so maybe we split that out. But if there's very similar needs within a segment, we may just combine that into one group.
Mm-hmm.
And so don't get too dogmatic of you've got to say every customer is listed here, every segment is listed here. We want to focus on what are the key ones and what are the ones that you're focusing on as a business. That's where we really want to focus our attention and our time in breaking this down. Anything
Yep.
to add there, Travis?
No, I think, and some businesses could even get into Like let's just take commercial property as an example. You may have, if you dig a little deeper, you may have,
Yeah.
big shopping centers and a, a different type of commercial property that on the surface looks similar, but they could be totally, if you really dug down in the need of that customer, that could be its two distinct segments of your business, even though they both fall under the commercial property
Yeah.
category. And so that's what this is. It's a forcing mechanism to really ask yourself, who am I serving? And even if they look similar, is there something that makes them distinct that would dictate my offer and how I build my business from a resource standpoint, all of those things?
Yeah. Yeah. I think we need to make clear up front. We'll probably repeat this again is the way we fill this out is not prescriptive. It's not got to be done a specific way each time. Your business, the way you think about your business can determine how you fill this out. Because again, this is really for your purpose to better understand the business, better understand how everything works together.
Mm-hmm.
What's next for us?
So next we jump over to value proposition. And so you can just think of that as this is what you are providing to the customer segments that they'll pay for. So it's really, why are they going to pay for yours over someone else's? And the key connection there is that truly understanding what your customer's trying to do, and most typically what pain they're trying to avoid. They're also trying to obtain gains, but a lot of times, people buy because they're trying to avoid some type of pain. And so it's, what is our combination of things that people are paying for, and they're paying for it ours over somebody else's?
Yeah, and I filled out this, and it's more just a list of all the things that you could be providing, right? And so some of these are going to be prescriptive to you, but some of these are going to be general. There's a lot of security guard businesses that have 24/7 availability. There's a lot that have rapid response. There's a lot that have maybe a call center that you can call back and get immediate stuff from. There's a lot that have technology, partners that they work with. Um, it could be that you're law enforcement heavy, and so that's maybe a value prop. Really, when we think of value props, it's what's unique about you. So meaning everyone in the industry doesn't have it. So and we're using the term value here. You could say, what are the values of the business, right? Because that's likely highly related to that value prop. And it's going to be, what's the inner relationship between all of those? So maybe your 24/7 availability with a really heavy customized planning aspect for your clients. And so that is what your value prop looks like. I went, one direction with this. You could go completely another direction. And I think what Travis said is it's being the unique value that you provide. So think about what separates you from your competition when you're going into a bidding process, when you're sitting down with a potential new customer. What are you talking to them about that differentiates you from the other person that they're talking to? And that's where we really want to focus on with the value prop.
Yeah, and I think it's important too, like what this highlights is, I mean, I guess there could be wrong answers, but it's really, this is more of a, which playbook are we looking to run here? So let's take the customer segment, for example. Like, you decide, are we trying to address this pain? Are we trying to help with this gain? Are we trying to just help them accomplish this job? You could focus on any one of those, but you have to pick something to then say, okay, how are we uniquely gifted to address that? And that's going to be our value proposition. You could design your value proposition to address any of those things, but it comes back to, what are we uniquely gifted at to do? And that's the play you're going to run, is try to do that. But it takes time truly understanding that, and having some introspection of, what are we good at? What assets do we hold, tangible or intangible? What people do we have? And how can we then bear those against the things that the customer segments have said, this is important to them?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think we'll probably talk about this at the end a little bit more, but business is an uphill battle, right? It's every day you got to slog up that next step and up that hill. But when we align this value prop with that customer segment and we can start looking at it in this way, you can see there's a very specific person that you're going to be really good at serving. And once you can identify that and chase after that, now instead of straight vertical, maybe it's like rock climbing before where every step is difficult and now you've made it to where it's like a staircase for you, right?
Mhm.
And I think that is where this can be important and helpful.
Yep.
What's next?
So next we go to channels, and that's essentially how do we communicate with the people who we've identified as who we've designed our value prop for. And so you spend the most time in customer segments and value proposition because, again, everything else hinges on those two things. Who are we going after and what are we offering them? And then once you get there, everything else hinges on those things. And so you can think about, channels as, do we have a sales team? Are we doing ads? Do we have inside sales, outside sales? This is how are we going to communicate to the world or the people that we have built something for, that we have something for them. And so it's your distribution. How are we getting the word out there is the main way I think about it.
Yeah, and like I put more broad
Mm-hmm.
categories here, and that's because again, we're not giving a specific example, but it's like, are you selling directly to your customer? Is it coming from word of mouth of you did a good job and now other people within the industry are hearing and seeing that you did a good job and that's how you're getting there? Is it networking that you're doing locally or broader? Is it conferences? You mentioned ads. I didn't put that here from a physical security perspective because that it's really a lot more based off personal relationship than it is, that sort of deal. But you totally can talk about a million other channels. If you have a sales team, if you have a specific marketing strategy where you're going and you're doing social media stuff and you have a newsletter, like that's what I'm focused on, right? Is I'm focused on those marketing channels there. And so that is something that again, a million different ways you can go about it. But you have to lean into what are your most valuable ones. And this is a good spot where it's like, okay, what are we doing today and what might we want to be doing in the future? Right.
Yes.
And you can make that connection of, and this is where we found it's really helpful because when we're modeling stuff out from a financial perspective, we can say, what are you doing now? Well, you have a one person sales team. Well, what do you want this to look like in the future? And when you paint that future vision, we can now build a model around that vision that you have.
Mm-hmm.
And that helps us to plan what that forecast, what the future costs are so that we can plan for those things.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And a lot of times when we do these, what we like to do is you can almost pull in little sticky notes and put on here and you can color code them because you can have two different customer segments and the channels to reach those are very different. You may have a B2B segment that's very sales driven. We've got a sales force out there doing it where you do a little bit of residential work and maybe it's more, Facebook ads or something, that's probably not a good example, but it's a totally different channel, same business, different customer segments. And so you're reaching them different ways. And
Yeah.
so, what's important is through all of this, there will be certain areas of each one that may pertain to only one of your customer segments. But you have to understand that, you have to and again, it goes back to understanding who your customer is. You have to understand those things to map out how are we going to get in front of them and talk to them.
Yeah, a good example, and you kind of used an iteration of this is there's the physical security businesses. I'm thinking more like B2B, right?
Mm-hmm.
Where you're serving a physical location, or you're serving a company and whatever asset, like whatever way that they need it. Well, all of those sales channels are going to be getting in front of them, talking to them, building a relationship, and then over that relationship and trust gained, they're going to eventually hire you.
Mm-hmm.
Or if you're in government, it's going to be a bidding process, right? Where you have to go through and it's a highly competitive process. You may have to present. And so that's going to look completely different. But now with all the technology that's out there, they've come out with these apps that individuals can go submit a request to have someone either drive them or come protect their house or whatever, come to an event, whatever that looks like. Well, that marketing channel is much more going to be an online marketing channel where you're going to be pushing ads out to Facebook. You're going to maybe create content that's like clickbaity content that's going to get people aware of what that the solution is there. And you're with that, you've talked about three different businesses or three different models, three different customer segments within the same type of business, that the
Mm-hmm.
value prop is completely different. And the difference between those customer segments and value prop means that the channel of advertising, the channel that you go to reach your customers is a completely different channel. And
Yep.
so again, you can see the diversity of that and what that potentially looks like.
Mm-hmm. Totally agree. Okay, so next we go to customer relationships, and you can think about this as kind of what happens during the transaction and then after the transaction. So during the transaction, are they working with a customer rep who's a sales rep who's walking them through everything, or is this self-service where those are kind of the ends of the spectrum? Self-service being they just go online, they order it, and the thing shows up. And so you have to understand what it is your customer expects. If your customer expects a dedicated person, if they pick up the phone and call, they know exactly who's going to answer, but you're trying to give them self-service where they schedule it themselves, like that's not going to work. That's going to be a disconnect. And so this is truly, once we are at the sale and afterwards, what does our relationship look like with our customer? And again, these all have downstream financial impacts, because if it's a direct person, well, that means we probably need more headcount at a certain point. They can only handle so many people. So then if we hit a certain level of volume, we need more of those people. All of these things feed into the financial part of things.
Yeah, for sure. And for say a security business, I thought of, okay, what are the ways that this customer is interacting with the business? If they have an account manager, someone who is maybe even a supervisor for that site, that is making sure that is talking to the people on site, making sure that their needs are getting covered. These days you have a lot of, say, back office support where they have a call center that you can call into. So I said they may have a support center relationship where they call into there, or
Hmm.
they may have the actual guard or person on site. If you think about this, like Travis said, all of these have financial implications, but they also have um, a relationship implication, meaning they can have a good relationship with the site manager, but if their experience with support is bad, or you're not getting good guards onto the site, good employees onto the site, they could make a switch because that is maybe what's more important to them. So we have to understand within this customer relationship, what is most important to your customer,
Hmm.
right? Where are they putting the value in the relationship, and make sure that we're assigning the same appropriate value to that piece. But then also making sure you don't have weak links, because all it takes is one weak link in this customer relationship to really impact the way the relationship with that customer, and potentially mean that customer is on the fritz or looking somewhere else. And so um, again, this interacts with everything from cost to like Travis, you mentioned the self-service aspect. If there's a self-service thing, but they want a personal touch, all of this interacts with, if you're serving a specific customer segment with a certain value prop, they may expect a different relationship. And the pricing that you do is also going to impact this as well. The
Hmm.
higher price that you serve, the more personalized relationship they expect. And so, again, we want to make sure that this aligns with all the other elements of the canvas.
Yep. Yep. So next, we're going to go to revenue. which is, somewhat self-explanatory, but it's essentially how do you take your value proposition and monetize that? Are you selling a resource? Are you selling like something where they just buy it, like a book? Like you sell it and it's theirs now. Are you selling an ongoing relationship? Are you selling like that's basically time, but it's essentially how are you turning that value prop into money coming in? And you can almost think about these first five we've covered. If I've heard it explained this way, the 1 through 5 on the business model canvas is kind of like the front of a restaurant. It's the things you see, and so what we've just done is kind of covered those things, with revenue being the last one. All these things are the first four lead up to, okay, now how do we monetize this?
Yeah. And we can think about these revenue streams in a few different ways. And so you can think about it as like, what are the different revenue sources that you're tracking? So sometimes people track by the type of business. So you have armed or unarmed security guards here. Some you might track by what is hourly versus what is may a recurring service look like? You think of, like, I'll just use a consumer business like Apple. Apple is going to have their physical product that they sell, but then they're going to have their services like Apple TV, other subscription services. And so then you get into those different types of revenue there. So you could have it based off of type of service. You could have it more client focused. You could have it based off of the different activities that you have. It's pretty common, for example, you'll maybe have a guard service, but then you'll have a consulting fee. So like if you're doing site assessments, if you're doing other training or policy stuff, that could be another revenue stream. And you want to think about what is needed for each of these revenue streams, right? So we're going to have identified some of that with the segment, with the relationship, with the value prop. We're going to have identified some of those things, but we want to think through how do those things align and make sure that when we're looking at these revenue streams, we have all the support that's necessary for that particular stream.
Yep. So
okay, so then let's go to the next. You said that's more front of the house. Now we're going more back.
Now we're going into the kitchen. This is more the back of the house. And so the next one we go to is key resources. And that's essentially, what are the things we need in order to serve the customers, reach them through the channels we've said, maintain those relationships, provide value, and bring in revenue. And so you can think of these as, you can put them in kind of buckets a lot of times. It's your tangible things, it's your intangible, it's your people, it's intellectual. Like, what are the things we have to have in order to pull this off? And so, for a lot of businesses, it could be machinery, it could be certain people with certain knowledge, things like that. But it's what are those things?
Yeah, and so for security business, again, this will depend. Some will have heavy vehicle expenses because they're doing kind of those roving securities. Others won't. Some are gonna, obviously a key aspect is security personnel. If that scheduling software allows you to have less people, that's going to be a big key resource, right? And then others, depending on the type of work you do, you could have insurancing or license needs. That again, that's kind of a quasi resource, right? But it's totally it's something that's important and key to require in the business operation. And so just go through these first five and look through those things and ask, what are the things that are key to serving this revenue stream? What are the key things that are to serving this customer segment? And those often translate into resources, right? So if you're heavy tech, that may be a key resource that we identify here. If you're heavy on personnel, that's going to be your key resource. But again, think through that and make sure that when you're looking through the whole thing, the big picture, that we're making sure that we've identified the key resources for each of those revenue streams, customer segments.
Yep. Yeah, and this is a big, like, from just a financial standpoint, like a lot of times where you'll see some bigger expenses, if we have a vehicle fleet, well, it's such, if we add somebody else, that's another vehicle, and so going back to how does all this translate to financials, it helps us totally understand the business and model that out for growth or different levers we can pull to improve the finances.
Yeah, it's a great point because it's like that interrelationship between those resources too,
Yep.
right?
Yep. Totally agree.
So next we're going to key activities. Talk
Yep.
talk to us
Yep.
about that.
So key activities is you can almost think of, okay, what are the things we need to do with the resources we have? And so whether it's, guarding a place, a lot of businesses too, it can be kind of internal stuff. So, uh, quoting a job, like that's a key activity. We need to be able to scope out a job, quote it. Maybe it's designing something, if you're building something or manufacturing something, but it's what are the things we need to be really good at that are going to deliver that value proposition at a level from a revenue level that we can justify.
Yeah. And when you think about this from a security guard company perspective is we know recruiting security guards is really, really hard, right? And so that is going to be how are you keeping the pipeline full? If you're more focused on sales side, you could have key activities related to that sales. I put bidding here because if you think about, you may have always just quoted, hey, it's this dollar per hour and we're just going to bill you for the hours, right? Well, then you're not having to bid anything. But now you go into a new customer segment that requires that you're bidding on jobs. You now may have a key activity on bidding. I put training. You may have those resources internally, but I've seen it to where that key resource, that person leaves, and now all of a sudden you had good training for your guards, and all of a sudden you don't, and now you're seeing issues with your guards because they're not well trained. And so you may need to make sure that you understand this is a key activity. If that person leaves or if that training relationship is broken, we know that we got to act quickly to replace that because that has a fundamental impact on the way that we operate as a business. And
Yep.
then I put payroll because it's like you mentioned, the back of the office. Like if people don't get paid, they're very quickly going to quit working for you. So you can
Yep.
have a great recruiting strategy, you can have great training, you can have great team, and then all of a sudden they don't get paid, they get paid late for payroll, and now you've got a revolt. And so again, that's this again an oversimplification. There's so many more key activities we could go into,
Yep.
but these are ones that I've seen examples of first and foremost where things have broken down and all of a sudden the promise you made to the customer you couldn't fulfill because you didn't recruit. All of a sudden you were great and now you're having a lot of turnover because training went off.
Yep.
And there's so many things that with these that you have to pay attention to. And it's easy to think this is goofy, right? We know this, but I've seen it. People don't react quickly, and it's because they've taken it for granted. And so identifying these key activities, now when this big thing happens, we can immediately go and reference this and say, no, we've got to take this seriously, right?
Yep. Yeah. And something that just came to mind through this, a lot of businesses, they may know these things, but they haven't quite grasped how they're connected across the business. And
Yeah,
so
good
something
point.
like this can do that. I think the other thing it can do is you may have employees and staff that you've asked to do certain things and they're going, why do I need to do that? They don't understand where it fits into the big piece. And so something like this could say, hey, I know you're just running payroll and that feels very mundane and it feels, mindless, but like, here's why that's super important for our business. Here's where it fits into the entire machine and where it gives people a perspective of where they fit in the business and why it's important.
Yeah, well, and I was thinking down that personnel aspect, that line of thinking too, of the owner or maybe the leadership, they understand all of these elements intuitively because
Mm,
they've been there, they've seen it happen. And there's the assumption that when you do that, that when you understand that, everyone else understands that too.
Yep.
By delineating these things, you're providing the foundation for everyone else to understand those, even if you've not experienced them.
Mm.
And so those things that you take for granted, now that we stated them, maybe you include them and you walk them through the business model canvas. But even if you don't do that, by now you identifying it as one of the key things, it can change how you communicate that to the person to make sure they understand the importance of what they're doing.
Yep.
This goes to kind of and it's another iteration of this, but it's the key partners aspect. And
Yep.
those key relationships, we need to identify and understand those key relationships, because if we don't, we can take them for granted. And all of a sudden we're now in a world of hurt, right? So
Yep.
let's talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, so our key partners, you can think about them in a few different ways. Some of it is, okay, there are certain resources we need or activities we need to perform that we don't have in-house. And so we need to sub those out or outsource those. The other piece is, if you're acquiring, inventory, or you've got a sales channel that's, through an industry group, like those would be key partners that really, essentially, you're either saying, is there something we want to outsource that we don't possess that we really need? And so we can bring a key partner in on that, or somebody that helps us fulfill, our sales channel, things like that. So it's basically the groups of people that aren't internal to your team that you're working with that are vital to make this thing work.
Well, and it's like, say you don't have the technology, you're using outside partners, whether that be an integrator or whether that be the actual camera company, whoever it
Mm.
is that you're buying stuff from, those things go down and you've now put them in a lot of different facilities. You're responsible for that because of that relationship, right?
Yep.
You're in charge of that. And so you have to understand what those key relationships are and make sure that they're there. It can also be that you're maybe you have a a supplier of like I think of, you know, with all of these tariffs that happen, this is not necessarily a security example, but it's like with all these tariffs, they had one factory that they worked with, and now
Mm.
all of a sudden that is put at jeopardy. And so if you don't take that serious, that can really take a business to bankruptcy. And so for security businesses, I talked about what those training relationships are. So we talked about training and activities. So if you're training, you're outsourcing your training to someone else, that is a key relationship, because if
Mm.
that breaks down, now all of a sudden you're not in a good spot. Could be your insurance if you deal with a lot of insurance issues all the time. It could be your technology vendors if you're heavy on tech. Could be that you hire and recruit from law enforcement, right? Um, so those are all key things that we need to consider and think about. If you're running, we talked about payroll being an activity that's important.
Mm.
If you're outsourcing payroll, you got to have that relationship locked
Yep.
down, because that can really upset the apple cart a little bit.
Yeah, I think another place this comes in too is when you think about key partners, and most businesses we come into, they're wanting to grow. And so you have to look at those key partners and say, are they equipped to grow with us? Or do we need to start, if we put too much pressure on the system by increasing sales, those kind of
Yeah.
things, but our key partners can't handle it, well, things break down then. And so we have to evaluate them from that angle as well.
Yeah, that's a great point, because again, that relationship may be good in time, right? In that moment, but then all of a sudden something happens, whether that be a change at that partner, or whether that be you've outgrown that partner. There's a lot of things that can cause those relationships to essentially expire
Mm.
and need to seek somewhere else, and you don't want to be behind the eight ball with that.
Yep.
Okay, last we have
We've got our
the
cost.
cost
Yep.
structures.
And
Yeah.
these are, you could go a lot of different directions with this. We typically look at this as what are the main costs that are driving our business that are going to impact, is it hours spent, on a job? Is it materials that we're buying? What are the main things that we need to be sure we're accounting for in our pricing, and what are the drivers behind those things? And a lot of times that's going to be driven behind the resources you have and the activities you need to perform. If you can, understand those and understand how much the value you're trying to add, that's what we're trying to put our finger on to really understand what we need to track to make sure the numbers work at the end of the day.
Yeah. And again, this is really, really goofy, and I acknowledge that to start out, but the best way to identify your cost centers is do something an elementary school student can do. And that is look at your income statement and
Yep.
what are the big numbers, right?
Yep.
it's,
That's
it's
literally it.
really,
It's
it's
no more
really,
complicated than that.
yeah, it's really, really goofy. But I've just outlined a few here that are pretty common. That first set of three, labor, training, and uniforms, are all directly related to the employee. So what are the employee costs? That's going to be your main cost center. Um, the one thing I want to point out here is there's obviously your labor is generally set, right? You know what you're paying people. You may have to give raises, you may have changes, and you may have benefits changes that go up 10 or 15%. And so that may be pretty dramatic, and you got to be careful with that. You got to understand that. But one of the big ones in security guard businesses is overtime, right? There's the uncertainty of if you're not billing a customer for overtime and now you have a lot of overtime on a job, you can take something that is profitable and immediately be in a place where you're struggling with that. And so we got to make sure, I would just highlight within this cost structures, if you have set cost structures, like we're talking about, like a general labor wage, um, think in terms of what are the variable costs within that can get us in trouble. And those are the things that we really want to focus on. Marketing is often a big one because you can have ads, or you can have some marketing activity that's doing really well, and then something fundamentally changes, an algorithm changes, new competitors enter, and that all of a sudden that cost structure changes. And so we want to think in terms of, yeah, what are the big cost structures? But then even within that, what are the ones that are more variable or have the ability to change on a dime, and then find ways to focus more on those big pieces?
Yep.
All right. So we've gone through the whole thing now. We have all 9 of these activities. And what we get to is then we fill this out. And Travis mentioned this as we went through, but when we go through with people, we not only identify what are the current things that are in this business model canvas for them, but what are their next things? And we'll often do this with, like he mentioned, we'll do this with sticky notes. And when we do this with a sticky note, we're doing one color of this is current, one color of this is future. We may even have other stuff we mix in there too, but it provides a picture of the business of this is what the state of the business is today. This is what we're in progress on, and this is maybe our future desired state. As we go through this, there's all sorts of things that we can learn. But one of the things that we hit on multiple times through here is this interconnectivity of all these things. And what we see is when things are interconnected really well, when you know your customer segments and your value prop really are linked, and then your channels are the best channels for that value prop, and we have the right relationships with that customer, meaning we have the right people in place, we have the right customer relationship structures in place. When we get those 4 right, that makes business seem so much easier, right? And it's not that it is easy, it always is hard in some way, right? But when those all work together and there's that synergy between those, those are the businesses that, when you think about how quickly can you grow, those are the businesses that can grow the most quickly and deal with the least headwinds when it comes to the future.
Yeah, I think there's a few things you touched on a minute ago with just this allows you to see how everything in the business is connected. It is a tool that can bring you up to speed pretty quick on what this business is and kind of for lack of a better term, the playbook they're running. What it can also serve as is a forward-looking tool, and you touched on this too, but it forces you to say, okay, like let's just use our example here. Let's say somebody was not going after government entities. Well, we can immediately say, okay, if that was a customer segment we wanted to go after, what's the value prop? How do we talk to them? What's the relationship look like? Where it not only can show you the current reality of your business, it's also a tool for planning forward where you can start then saying, okay, we've built this out. Now let's start putting some numbers to it. What would it take? What does that look like? What's our, everybody will be different on, what kind of return they're looking for, things like that. But this is such a great tool to help plan going forward as well. And we have seen the benefit for our team of it just being a common language where,
Yep.
if we need somebody to come in and help, with something we're working on, they can look at this and get a really good sense of, okay, I get a sense of how this business operates and then bring more strategic value to the table through the numbers lens than they would have if they just came and, were asked to create this spreadsheet with no context of the business and how it operates.
Yeah. One thing that I think is really cool to think about is let's talk about value prop and channels. So say you have a value prop that you're like, we're really good at this and no
Mm.
one can compete with us in this. And we have a channel that we're really good at. Say we're really good at doing ads, right? So if we can combine what is that value prop in those ads, how do those work together? And what's a good customer segment to chase because it's stuff that we're already good at. I think
Mm.
sometimes people get in this world of they have these say 1 to 2 customer segments and they just get in their mind, "Oh, I just want to chase this random segment," right?
Yes.
and and then to chase that segment, they think they're going to just be able to do what they've always done and it's going to work. But in reality, if you then zoom out and you say, actually, our value prop is different than the value prop this segment needs, that may not be a good fit. Or we're really good at this channel, but this new thing is going to require a completely different channel, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now, instead of just trying to reach the customer segment, you're having to build out new channels or you're having to build out a new customer relationship infrastructure. Maybe you don't have that support center. Maybe you don't have the call center. And now you're wanting to go to a 24/7 roving security and you got to have that call center. Now, not only are you trying to chase a new segment, you're trying to build new marketing channels and new customer relationship channels. And that became an infinitely more complex thing to do now.
Yep.
And so I think seeing this and thinking about these interrelationships is a really helpful filter as you look at new things. Not only for saying, should we chase this one particular thing, but saying what is already here. And then of what is here, what channel can we add that's going to serve this current thing, or what customer can we add that's going to further make us that we're going to be able to further utilize our customer relationships infrastructure, our value proper channels. What are all these things and how do they look like? And so
Mm.
that is something that I think is really valuable in here, is because it gives you a great structure to kind of leap off of and kind
Yep.
of move forward with.
Yeah, it allows us to, I mean, again, going back to what we said at the very beginning, that people hire us with the expectation we're going to give them strategic advice through the financial lens, but strategic advice. And so we can use something like this as kind of our baseline, of what we're doing now. So if that person does say, hey, I think we're going to try to start selling to this customer, we can step in. And part of our job is to push back some. And we can say, well, this is not currently a customer we're going after. And so let's walk through how that changes the business, which is what you were just speaking to, Curtis. And so again, this it's hard for us to overemphasize how important it is for us to understand the business in order to do our job well. And we feel like this tool allows us to do that, get up to speed a lot quicker than we would otherwise. And while it's, I mean, you may say differently, Curtis. I don't think you would, but it's a non-negotiable for us. We have to understand, go through this type exercise to work with somebody, because otherwise they're going to be disappointed. They're not going to get the kind of advice they're looking for from us.
Yeah. And we're going back with customers that we didn't do this, that started before we started this process, and we're going to start doing this with them because
Mm,
that's how important we think it is. And again, before it was really easy for businesses to chase these squirrels, right? Where
mm,
you're just saying we're just going to go down this road, and for us it's like easy for us to put a couple of lines together and model this out and say, oh yeah, this looks nice and rosy, right?
mhm,
But thinking in terms of this canvas as a whole, it's kind of a playbook that we can go back to and we can use as a reference. And I think people don't do this a lot of times because they're like, well, it's going to take a lot of time, right? But we'd walk through this with our customers. We are able to walk through this in a 2.5 hour meeting where we're
mm,
doing a lot of other stuff too. So really, we can get through this in an hour and a half. We may revisit it.
mhm,
And then from that point, you really only need to revisit it if something changes, or maybe a refresher on an annual basis. Just look at it and see what this looks like.
mm,
And it's a really low, easy lift that, again, as you hopefully saw from us talking through this, you can now see these interrelationships and see how these are things that could easily get overlooked in just the general process. That now this has provided us with a kind of canvas to work off of
mm,
and work together on. And going back to um, going back to kind of the team aspect is, I get it. You understand your business. You don't need this for you, right? But imagine how many in your team this might be helpful for, right?
mm,
So think through that as well, because sometimes within teams, the biggest issue is uh, we don't have a common vocabulary,
mhm,
and this has helped us get a common vocabulary with our customers, but also you can get a common vocabulary with your team, right? And if you start thinking in this framework, um, you invite others in to those strategic relationships in a way that um, that forces them to not just come to you and say, "Hey, we need to go chase industrial facilities because I know this guy that did this."
mm,
It forces them to take ownership. Okay, if we're going to do that, how's that going to impact these other elements? And so I think even from that perspective, even if you're like, I'm not going to get any benefit out of this, think about the benefit that your team can get from this. And that can be transformational for the right person. And is everyone going to latch onto it? Absolutely not.
yeah,
But if you have that one person that might latch onto this, that you might be able to see now they're way more capable than you thought in the past. You can build up leaders through this, and it's a great tool for communication.
yeah.
So I would encourage everyone to consider that, to go through this process yourself, spend some good time, invite others into the process with you. We'd love to go through the process. We have a assessment process that we do where we do this as well as other financial and accounting analysis,
Mm.
and present to you some feedback and ideas that we have. So we love to go through that with you if you want to do that. But this is something, again, you can also do yourself, do with your team, and I believe 100% that you'll see huge returns from this.
I agree. I would even push back a little bit and say even the people that don't feel like they need to do this because they know their business so well, uh, I would say the people that have gone through this that felt like they knew their business and almost felt like this was a time wasted activity on the front end came out getting benefit because of the questions we asked them about the segment, mainly around the segments and the value propositions. I think there's a lot of assumptions that are being made there, not maliciously, but just if you've been doing it for a while, you start making these assumptions. And again, those could be correct assumptions, but they probably need to be challenged a little bit, or maybe challenged is the wrong word, explored, dig in a little bit more. And I think that's where a lot of the benefit has come, even for the folks that didn't feel like they needed this, was the introspection that it forces.
Yeah, I think we have some of the most interesting conversation on value prop because people
Mm-hmm.
assume they know what their value prop is, and then you start talking about it, and they're like, "Well, how's that unique?" Well, it's not really unique. Everyone does it this way, and
Yep.
it's like it forces you to really get to that. And I think customer segments is helpful for us because it helps. We're typically working with growing businesses, so it helps us see what direction they think they're headed, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so then once we identify these are segments that they might chase, we can now dig into, okay, how are we going to reach them? What's the value prop to them? What's the relationship we have? How's that going to change the other aspects of the business? And so this is again something that um, hopefully, as we've talked through this, you can see how invaluable this is and how, again, this is a tool that, quite frankly, I mean, is semi new to us. We've only started using it this year, but it was
Mm-hmm.
one of the things and one of the few things that you just immediately see huge returns on.
Yep.
And so we've become advocates of this approach. And I'm sure there's other things out there that work well too, right?
Mm.
So this is just one tool in the toolbox. But again, it's a tool and forces people to think in a way that they've not think. So any closing thoughts as we kind of wrap it up here, Travis?
I don't think so. If you're curious about doing it with someone, we'd be happy to do it.
Yeah, Travis is the guru at this, and we're getting more and more reps at it.
I
Uh,
just ask a lot of questions.
yeah. He's a good question asker. He puts on a good thinking face, a good reflection
That's
face,
right. That's
and
right.
makes you feel good about it. And no, like we love learning these things, so we love this process. I think people also I'll just kind of add this one thing before we go. If like they get scared, they don't like being put on a spot, and
Mm,
they feel like intimidated. And what we've seen is every business owner we've talked to is really, really smart and they have a
mm.
lot of good stuff, but everyone is intimidated and fearful.
Yep.
And no one we all come trying to learn, right? And so do not be intimidated by the process. Do not be fearful. That again, I think the stat is like, I think it's 54% of business owners when they talk about financials, feel inadequate.
Mm,
And I think you could say the same thing of when you ask them to essentially, they feel like you're asking them to open the kimono as you talk about this stuff.
yep.
And they don't like doing it. But everyone that we've done this with has said, when we got to the end, oh, I can see how valuable this is. This was
Mm,
really helpful to talk through and think through.
yep.
So I'd encourage you to dig in to that discomfort, lean into it, and go through this process. And I think the return that you'll get will be obvious immediately upon doing this. So thank you for listening to us talk through this day. Hopefully, you see the value for you, and we'd love to talk to you if you're interested. And again, thanks for listening and watching.